Welcome to the S.J. Child Show, where a little bit of knowledge can turn fear into understanding. Enjoy the show. Hi, thanks for joining the SG Child Show. Today, I am really excited to get into this conversation with a retired NYPD detective. We're going to have a really interesting conversation today. I hope I said all of that correctly. Vic, is it pronounced Ferrari?
Yeah, just like the car.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, it's so nice to have you here. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on your show.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to hear about your stories that you have to share and talk about your books that you have written and maybe find out what pushed you into becoming an author. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Tell us from the start. Tell us an introduction. Give us a little bit of sense of who you are.
Sure. My name is Vic Ferrari. I'm a retired 20-year member of the New York City Police Department. Born and raised in the Bronx, New York City kid. I knew what I wanted to do at a very early age. My mother used to take me to the movie theater that was around the corner from the police station. So on Saturdays, I would hang around the police station and watch the cops and look inside the police cars.
Oh, cool.
By age 10, I was going to the post office with my friends, and we were stealing FBI wanted posters off the walls and going around the neighborhood having manhunts.
Oh.
And I grew up watching the Rockford Files and the French Connection and all these police shows. So I knew what I wanted to do at an early age. And by 20, I was in the New York City Police Academy. And I had a 20-year career in law enforcement. I worked at a lot of different units, including DUI, plainclothes. At 15 out of my 20 years, I worked in the Narcotics division. My last 10 years, I was a detective in the NYPD's Auto Crime division. So anything to do with stolen vehicles, changing VIN numbers on stolen cars, exporting stolen cars out of the country, chop shops, you name it. I worked on, and after a 20-year career with the NYPD, I got bored. I got into writing. I've written a series of books, 4 of which are about a humorous behind-the-scenes look at the New York City Police Department.
Yeah, that sounds so interesting too. I bet there's lots of stories. And how did they feel about the books? Does everybody seem like they were on board, or were some people, not okay? Or?
No, I didn't take a poll. It's one of those things. It's better to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission.
Yeah.
What I did was the two things when I got into writing these books, I didn't want to get anybody divorced or fired or embarrassed. So I changed the names, dates, ranks, locations, boroughs in some cases. I moved characters around, but the genesis of these stories all happened.
Yeah, that's exciting. It sounds like you've really, I'm excited to hear about some of these stories, if you don't mind sharing a few. I mean,
no, not at all.
What do you think the height of your career was?
Oh, my last 10 years. I mean, I really didn't have too many low. I mean, there's peaks and valleys with anything, but I mean, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I was getting myself into, and I loved for the most part, I loved every minute of it. There were times I wasn't so happy. Like, people don't realize most cops at some point in their careers are going to work Times Square on New Year's Eve. Right. And I did that 17 out of 20 years. I never volunteered for it, but it was the luck of the draw. And that's a miserable day to be a member of the New York City Police Department. You're down there in all types of weather. It's always cold, whether it's raining, snowing, and you're standing out there and they want you. It's not like you can hide anywhere in a building or go inside to take a break. You're on your feet from probably 2, 3 in the afternoon until 3, 4 in the morning until they break everything up.
Wow.
You're dealing with drunks all night long. When you're watching television and you see everybody like in those neatly packed groups, it's not. They're like cattle herded into these wooden pens, and there's no place to go to the bathroom. All those restaurants, they're not going to let you use their bathroom unless you have a dinner reservation. So there's people using the bathroom inside the crowd. People throwing up on each other, people feeling each other up, people getting robbed in some cases. And the fun begins after the ball drops, because then it's pandemonium. We start breaking down those wooden barriers so people can leave. And then you get all the hood rats from the different boroughs that come down there, and they're sober as a judge. It's like watching the Discovery Channel or the Animal Planet with the hyenas, and they come down and they're watching who's got a new cell phone, who flashed some cash, and they follow them off 42nd Street to the train or wherever, and they rob them. So it's a busy night. I hated every minute of doing that, but it was one day a year, but for the most part, my career was a wonderful experience.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that you said you knew what you wanted to do and that, you really went after those desires that you had when you were a kid. How did your parents, and I don't know, what situation you grew up in, but how did the adults in your life help you to push you to do those things that you wanted to do? What kind of support did you get?
They wanted me to go to college. I didn't want to go to college. Both my parents were working class people. They were just happy I had a job. They were nervous because I graduated high school at 18. I wasn't going to college, and it would be at least 2 years before I could become a member of the New York City Police Department. So they were quite concerned, like, what is he going to do now? So my father told me, you have to work. So I said, yeah, that's fine. If you want to live here, you have to work. And oh God, I must have had 10 or 15 jobs in those 2 or 3 years because I would get bored and I would do something else. I was an exterminator. I cleaned planes at LaGuardia Airport. I unloaded trucks for UPS. My parents wanted to kill me, but they were extremely happy when I got a civil service job with the New York City Police Department.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure they were. I'm sure they were really proud of you, and especially the 20 years that you put in, and that's really great, and what an accomplishment that must have been for you.
Yeah, they were happy. I mean, they went to my graduation, they went to my promotion ceremony when I got promoted to detective. They were very supportive. My dad was more nervous than my mother for whatever reason. He would always be careful, and even like just a couple of years before I retired, he'd like, don't do anything crazy. You only got a year or two to go. And I'm like, Dad, I got it. I've been doing it 17, 18 years. I know, I know how this works.
Bless their hearts. Yeah, that's really great. No, I love to hear when parents are, into what their teenager, child, adult is doing and really giving that support behind that, because it's so important. I bless my parents' hearts. They were so involved in their own careers. They didn't really look and see what I was going to be doing with mine. So on my own, and I just forged my own way. And that's great too, because then I can look back and say, I accomplished all these things on my own without, the push of anyone else. So, tell us about when you started getting into writing. Did you always like to write? Like, how did that begin?
I knew I had a talent for it because when I was working in organized crime, we have to write lengthy reports on surveillance or arrest. It's not just like when you're on patrol and it's who, what, where, when, why. You got to be a little bit more detailed when you're a detective. And I remember my lieutenant laughing, like reading some of my reports. I guess my sarcasm bleeds into my writing.
Oh.
And he would return and go, "This is really funny." He says, and I appreciate it. He says, but if someone reads this downtown, he goes, take out some of these adjectives and, kind of dumb it down a little bit. I'm like, okay, no problem. I didn't get into I didn't get into law enforcement to become a writer. It was after I retired, I was bored out of my mind. I had moved down to Florida. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And friends and family said, you got all these wild stories. You should start writing them down. And luckily for me, I have a really good memory, and I have a lot of friends who I still keep in touch with that are retired or at the time current NYPD members. So from time to time, they would bounce ideas off of me, or I would call them up and go, remember that time? Like, who was involved in that? How did that exactly shake out? So, and now what's funny is after I started writing these books, now every time one of my books comes out, my phone blows up from my friends like, you should have wrote about this guy and you should have put this one in here. And so, it's funny how like now they're my biggest critics.
Yeah, that is great too. What's tell us the titles of the books and where we can tell me where they are. They're on a line on Amazon, or how can we get them to?
Yeah, all my books are available on Amazon.
Okay,
if you just go to the Amazon book section and type in Vic Ferrari, like the car. My Amazon book library will come up. So
Great.
we've got my latest NYPD book, NYPD Law and Disorder. That's about
I
the
love that.
embarrassing things that happened in the NYPD. NYPD Through the Looking Glass, stories from inside America's largest police department. That's a humorous behind the scenes look at the NYPD. The NYPD's Flying Circus, Cops, Crime, and Chaos. That's about a lot of interesting criminals and bizarre coworkers I worked with. Grand Theft Auto, the NYPD's Auto Crime Division. That's about my 10 years in the Auto
Wow.
Crime Division. So it's everything you wanted to know about the stolen car industry, who steals your car, what happens at a chop shop, how to prevent your car from getting stolen, sophisticated auto theft rings that my office and I worked on, different cases. My last book is called Confessions of a Catholic High School Graduate. I kind of moved away from writing about the NYPD for a year, and it's about me growing up in the Bronx and my path going through
Yeah.
Catholic high school and then later becoming a member of the New York City Police Department.
Wow. Those look really interesting. I actually would be, I'm not really big into reading all the time, but that would definitely engage my mind and make me feel curious as to what would be behind those pages. So I'm gonna have
Thank you.
to, yeah, absolutely. When you were writing them and you would get these ideas of stories, what's your favorite story? I mean, I know there's probably so many. What's one that might stick out in your mind the most?
Oh, I have so many, but I like to tell the Hansel and Gretel story because that happened to my old partner, but it's actually pretty funny. It's morbid, it's dark humor, but it's funny. It's the early 90s. We're all single, we're going to cop bars, we're meeting girls, and my old partner was working with a guy that was an amateur magician on the side. So we'd be at the bar talking to girls, and he would come over and start pulling flowers out of his sleeve and coins behind the ear. And I'm like, could you get him out of here? Like, how do you compete with this guy? And he says, yeah, I wish. He goes, he's a lazy cop, though. He goes, I wish he took, tying up balloon animals in the police car as much as he did his NYPD career. So one night on a midnight, him and his partner get called out to a basement apartment for calls for help. They go into the basement of the 6-story walk up, and there's 2 apartments. So they bang on door number 1. Nobody answers. My old partner, who's working with the magician, goes to bang on door number 2, and the magician says, what are you doing? We made so much noise down here. Our radios are blasting, our nightsticks and everything. This is nonsense. Let's get out of here. My old partner goes to bang on that door again. He goes, come on, I'll buy you a cup of coffee. Let's get out of here. Because he was lazy and he just didn't want to get involved. So they wind up leaving. What they didn't realize is behind door number 2, the super of the building lived there, and he was selling coke out of his apartment. And the super had fallen behind in his payments to his wholesaler. In the drug world, you don't make your payments, they're going to clip you. So what winds up happening is they send a couple of hitmen to kill him. And it's an old gypsy trick. They knock on the door and they put an attractive female in front of the door. The super opens up the door. The 3 of them bum rush him. They start pistol whipping him. Where's the money? Where's the drugs? He doesn't have any answers. They shoot the super in the head. They roll him up in a carpet. They take him out of the apartment and they throw him in the furnace of the building. They go back into the apartment, and while they're ransacking the apartment, my old partner and the magician are just about to bang on that door. So they look out the window and they go, oh, shit, we got a problem. So the 3 of them come up with a plan. The 2 guys tell the female, listen, if they start knocking on the door, let them in, lead them towards the kitchen, and just start yelling in Yugoslavian. Because they were Albanians. So she goes, just start yelling in Yugoslavian and just keep pointing to the kitchen. When you get past one of these bedroom apartments, throw yourself on the floor. We're going to come from behind. We'll kill the 2 cops. We'll throw them in the furnace. We'll go for the trifecta and get away with it. So they don't knock on the door and they leave. Well, about a week or 2 later, the super of the building, he had family. And what happened to him? So they see that there was a 911 call there around the time he vanished off the face of the earth. So they bring in my old partner and the magician, and they say, you guys got called out of that basement. Well, what's the story? Did you meet anybody? What was going on? And they said, no, we knocked on this door. We didn't knock on that door. But the funny thing is, when we were leaving, there was a car parked outside on a fire hydrant, and my old partner wrote that car parking ticket. That was the getaway car. It was registered to the female. The detectives track down the female. She starts spilling her guts, of course, trying to minus her involvement in it, but in for a penny, in for a pound. they were able to bring in the 2 hitmen. The 3 of them got locked up for murder. And it was February. So they had to go back to the building in the dead of winter, shut the power and heat off to the building so that furnace could cool down over the course of several days, so they could get this guy's skull and bones out of the furnace to build the case. And that story was called Last Night, A Magician Saved My Life. So my books have a lot of dark humor in it, and the irony of things that goes on in the New York City Police Department that most people would never think about.
Oh my gosh, no. And you wouldn't think about that. Definitely. If you don't live some situations, there's no way you could even imagine what they might be like for someone else. Isn't that the truth? So you've had a good response for the books. Now, when you wrote this last one about your kind of in growing up and going through those, what kind of stuff does it bring up for you when you go back to your past and bring those up? Is it sometimes you find that you're like, oh my gosh, I better dig through that part of my past? And it happens for me when I'm doing my own writing.
Yeah, Confessions of a Catholic High School Graduate. It's a walk down, for me, it's a walk down memory lane. It takes place in the late 70s, early 80s. I'm in middle school, and I was going to public school, and my dad, we were sitting around the dinner table, and my father said, next year you're going to Catholic high school. He says, we don't even go to mass. He goes, yeah, but you're a clown, and if I send you to public high school, you're going to become a bigger clown, so pick a Catholic high school. And I didn't want to do it. And it was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me, because I definitely needed the discipline and structure, because I was a pretty wild kid. And it's just about that time period of growing up in the Bronx. I wasn't taking a school bus, didn't pick us up on the corner. I had to take public transportation. And, I grew up in a neighborhood in the 70s and 80s. It was Italian and Irish with a little bit of the mafia sprinkled in. So there were things going on beneath the surface that I saw that I didn't quite understand. But as I got older, everything came to full circle. So it's just about growing up in the Bronx, and then my path from being a wild kid to go into the New York City Police Department.
Yeah. Did you ever have times where you had to arrest people that you knew, like from your childhood?
I didn't know. I never personally had to arrest someone from my childhood, but I had during the course of my career, I saw people from my childhood that had been arrested. Or I remember one time I was lodging a prisoner in Bronx Central Booking, and I had my back turned, and they have these big cages. I mean, it looks like something out of them. It looks like if you ever watch on television, like an Italian court where they've got like 50 people screaming in the cages. You've got these huge jail cells, and they move people from one to another before they go upstairs to court. And I had my back turned, and I was filling out a roster because I was lodging a prisoner, and they were moving prisoners, and I was hearing the names. When I call your name, go into cell B, Jones, O'Sullivan. And he called out a name. It's not a common name. It's an Italian name. And I said, my body stiffened. I go, no, that can't be. I played football with that guy. And I turned, and he comes walking out, and he looked at me, and he just smiled. And he went into the next cell. And the sad thing is he was dead a couple of months later. But yeah, I never personally had to lock up anybody that I grew up with. But yeah, I would run into people sometimes that from my past, right? That weren't doing too well. Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's never good to see your people that you know going down the wrong paths. I have that in my history of life too. Oh my goodness.
Like I write in that book, I go, you're going up and they're going down. So, I mean, you better get off that elevator or you're going to wind up in the basement too. There's a story from one of my NYPD books. I was a cop maybe 5-6 years. I was working in narcotics, and I was in my neighborhood, and I was going to the bank, and a kid I grew up with who lived like 2 doors down from me. And he's in a lot of my books because he was a wild kid. And he recognized me, and I knew he had done jail time. Like I knew he was upstate for something. And I could tell just by his look, he was using drugs. He's like, we got to go out for a beer. And I said, I hate to cut this short. I says, and it was good seeing you. I go, but I can't hang out with you anymore. And he goes, well, what are you talking about? And blah, 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 just because you're a cop. And I go, but what do we have in common? It's like
I'm criminals, but in the wrong way.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to quit my job. And, you're not going to quit being a criminal. So like, really, what do we have in common at this stage? It was good seeing you. And I hope you clean yourself up. And he didn't. I mean,
Mm.
actually, my brother called me a couple of years ago. He was reading his obituary. So, yeah,
Oh.
I mean, there were a lot of people I grew up with that went the wrong way. Either they got into drugs or organized crime, and it didn't
Yeah.
end well for a lot of them.
No, and there was probably a lot more um opportunities for that there in the Bronx down, and than there are around the United States. Not that there aren't available everywhere, but I can imagine that you either make the choice to take the right path or the wrong path, and yeah, there you
Well,
find yourself.
it was a different time, right? So it was a different time, and just the neighborhood, like people didn't really call the police in my neighborhood for too many things. It kind of got settled in street court. So, like, if you were screwing around with the wrong guy's sister, or you owed somebody money, like I write in my book, someone was going to pay you a visit with an Abraham Lincoln mask and a baseball bat.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there were
Took it
rules,
upon
and
themselves.
if
Yeah.
you got too close to the sun, you were going to get burned.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that the truth, huh? No, and I think that that's something a lot of people that wouldn't have been in your position wouldn't even think about, like you said, or consider that happens on a daily basis. What do you think about? I'm going to take you to a serious place here. What do you think about what type of training police around the country are getting now for neurodiversity, and what that looks different from maybe what it was like 20 years ago?
Well, I mean, in law enforcement, training never ends. It's
Mhm.
not like, you go through the police academy and that's it. You know what I mean? So, I mean, during my time period, and I got hired in the 80s, it was 6 months in the academy. Then it was another 6 months of training where you didn't go to a precinct back in my time. You went to a field training unit where you had several sergeants and you were put on foot posts and you learned little in increments. And then sometimes you would be with the sergeant in the car answering calls. And then after that 6 months, so now that's already a year of training, right? Then you go to a precinct, and since you're the new guy, they're going to kind of look out for you to a degree. They'll try to put you with somebody whose head is screwed on straight, although that doesn't always happen. And then there's constantly going to training. I mean, you
Yeah.
qualified with your gun twice a year. There was physical training. I mean, it just was nonstop. And then, like, when I retired from the NYPD, I moved down to Florida. I got my certification. I became a cop down in Florida for a short period of time. And it was the same thing. It was just more and more and more training. I think there's a misconception that cops don't get enough training.
I
Cops
love
get
that.
so much training. It's like you're responsible for these things. Cops are responsible for everything,
Mm.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
I remember when I came down to Florida, like one of the questions on the test was, and we didn't do this in New York, like the placards on trucks and the different chemical, the classes of hazardous material, non-hazardous. And I'm like, I mean, how much more are we going to be responsible for?
Mm.
I
Yeah.
definitely think there's a misconception that cops aren't trained, and it's not true. Cops are put through a lot of training.
I'm glad you said that. No, I think you're right about that. I think there is a misconception about that. And I think that society wants to hold a lot of blame, but they don't want to put these ideas that you have received, all of that. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think that the communities that don't have the understanding or education need to hear it. Just like I like to bring education about things in my community that they don't know about as well, regarding the autism and things in our family. But one thing I did a police training here in my city not too long ago, back in October. It was so fantastic. The officers were so excited to learn. They were so interested and engaged in the process. It gave me a better sense of what they want available to them and how important it is that they understand the community that they're working with and serving as well.
Well, it's funny, like you said, like some communities don't understand. The communities that don't understand the police are often the ones that call the police every 15 minutes to solve their
Amen.
problems.
Amen. That is the truth. That is such the truth right there. And as far as when I went into the training to the police, my part of it was I want to help parents in my community understand they need to have all of the correct information They need to have calm voices and they need to be bringing their best selves if they want to get what they're expecting out of whatever kind of emergency responder visit they're getting. They can't go into it with expectations that are unrealistic, no information, no, all of these things. So I'm exactly on your guys' side saying, hey, parents, you can't just be calling for everything and expecting any of these officers to even understand how to deal with a child they don't have any experience with. And if you don't give them all the information, like that's you're doing the disservice, not them. So don't turn around and blame them for it afterwards.
No, and definitely, and people will call the police what they don't realize, and what this happens quite a bit. And so the cops show up, they don't have the time to sit there and mediate everything. There's just not. There's calls stacking up. There's bigger and better things that are coming around, and I mean dangerous things coming around the corner. And it happens a lot of times. Two people are having a dispute, and a lot of times it's the person that calls the police, and they think they're in the right. And the cop doesn't side their way, and it leaves a bad taste in their mouth. But you're often better. And I'm not talking about taking matters into your own hands and hurting somebody or damaging someone's property or doing something ridiculous. But, a lot of times if people would take a step back and do I really want the police involved in this? You know what I mean? Like my parents would be mortified if when I was a kid to call the police over something. The neighbors like, did you see the Ferraris had a police car parked outside?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There was a stigma back then associated with it. Like you couldn't handle your own stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. I remember the few times that we had moved into our new home, and I have a son with challenging autism and a lot of support needs. And we had just gotten a fancy camera and alarm system. And right at the front door is that emergency call button. He hit that firefighter button 2 or 3 times and they came out, and bless their hearts, they were so understanding and so kind to accommodate, our non-emergency call. But it really, really gave me like, okay, thank goodness that they are so amazing. At the same time, parents probably don't know how scary it is that the fire department showing up at your house. And like you said, all the neighbors going, uh-oh, what's happened over at the Bradfords? Nope, just emergency calls gone wrong. So they did, however, I think after the third or fourth 911 call, because my our phones would be locked, but they would have that if call 911 like emergency button, you could slide instead. He would do that. And so I would a couple times had to deal with just the phone calls. Luckily, the police never made it over. When they called back, I discussed it with them, and they put us on some type of a list to let them know that it might not be the correct a real emergency call. So it only happened for a short phase in his life, and it never happened again after that. So hopefully we learned a lesson.
Now they understand.
Yeah, thank goodness, huh? No, it's been a fascinating discussion with you today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you coming back and giving me your time again. And I'm going to go onto Amazon and check out a couple of these books. Really kind of interested my mind. So I really
so much.
Grew up reading detective books and stuff. I loved that kind of stuff. So I think that's you either like it or you don't, right?
Yeah, no. And I mean, I don't hold back. So, I mean, like some of the criminal cases in my books, I mean, I try to show the irony in what's going on and behind the scenes look of investigating a case. I mean, there's funny stories, there's dark stories. I like to jump around in my books. My books don't have a beginning, middle, end. You'll pick up my book, you'll open it up. There's a chapter, be it police corruption or supervisors that I worked with, and boom, there'll be 3 or 4 short stories in all.
Yeah, they sound great. They really do. They sound like great books, and I look forward to checking them out. And I hope we can stay in touch, and I can just pick your brain if I have any more exciting, children problems coming up in the future. No, hopefully won't have those, huh? Won't have to be calling you. What do I tell the detective? No, just joking. Thank you so much, Vic, for your time today. I really appreciate it. And it was great to get to know you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Merry Christmas.
You as well. Thank you.